You know, I'll never forget the day I met Larry Scott, the very first Mr. Olympia. Yeah, he's the one that started it with Joe Weider. In fact, they were out to dinner prior to the competition even being created. And they were having a big steak dinner, and Joe ordered an Olympia beer. And as he was talking to Larry, he said, we need to have something that's more powerful than a Mr. Universe, a Mr. World, Mr. America. And then Joe looked at the beer and said, hey, how about we call it Mr. Olympia? And sure enough, that's where the Mr. Olympia title came from just Joe Weider and Larry Scott having a dinner. And of course, Larry competed in the very first show and won, and that started the Olympia franchise. But the biggest thing about Larry Scott was the first time I met him, he was putting on a seminar and he had a booth at this big show. And Larry approached me and said, I need someone to work my booth, make sure nobody's stealing my products and making sure they make it clear about who I am and what I'm about, because he was very spiritual. And he also wanted to make sure people understood bodybuilding is hard work, proper nutrition, hard training. And he wanted someone who believed in that style of health and fitness. And he followed my career, and he actually asked for me, because he knew I lived in New York. He knew this event was a venue where I actually was going to attend, and he asked the promoter, could you ask Mike Torchia if he'd like to work my booth? So sure enough, I met with Larry prior to the event, and he said to me, now, this is what I'm proposing to you, Mr. Torchia. If you work the booth over the weekend, I have two options for you. I can pay you $400 for the weekend, or I can give you something that's priceless. I'll train you. Of course, I said, I don't want the money. Mr. Scott, I'd love your tutelage. And Larry Scott trained me for a period of time. Taught me about how important protein powder is, and of course he had me use the Blair protein with the full fat milk. And I did put on some size, but also a lot of bulk. But most of all, to have the privilege of being trained by first Mr. Olympia, Larry Scott, with that magnificent physique, changed the course of my life. And then later on, of course, I worked out with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sergio Oliva, Mike Mentzer, Sergio Nebray, and Samir Banuth, and many other champions. But the way Larry took me under his wing and gave me that option, I'll never regret taking that option. So if you have someone that approaches you to do something, and he happens to be a pro bodybuilder, and you want to learn, ditch the money, trade it for knowledge. That's the most powerful thing you can get from anybody. And that's my tip of the day. Leave your comments below.